Welcome to the second half of the knowledge chapter. So today we're going to be talking about how it is that we decide certain things are stored in a particular category. So we were talking on the first half about hierarchies as maybe being something that's too strict of a category for the way that we store information. But Eleanor Roche came up with this idea of prototypes, and it's this idea that there's a central tendency or an average that we use to determine whether or not something belongs. And this is also consistent with this idea of the typicality effect, where typical category members are responded to most rapidly. So what is a prototype? It's considered the central tendency of a category, the best instance of a category, or as I've mentioned before, it's the birdiest bird. So when I say bird, what comes to mind? And it's often something that's like a blue jay or a red bird or something that you consistently see. Prototypes are also judged really quickly after priming. So an example would be if I show you the word blue and then show you examples of blue that is a really good example, or green, really good examples of green, or I show you these less nice examples of blue or green, you're going to be much quicker to endorse that the really blue blue is blue or the really green green is green. So it's the idea that when you say green, you get the prototype of green in mind, and then if it's a good match to green, you're inclined to pick it more quickly than a poor match to green. So this is also the case in natural categories, like we're mentioning with colors. It's also the case when determining whether or not something is in an animal category. And this is something that has been tested in remote tribes like the Dani tribe, where they also create prototypes of abstract categories as well as natural categories. And Posner in the 60s is very well known for work that he did creating prototypes in a lab, where he would show people examples of prototypes like you see on the top of the figure, or he would create those, but he wouldn't show them to people. He would show people these versions of a prototype, which are at the bottom of the figure. However, people were quickly to later on say that they had seen the prototype when it's shown again at test because people were familiar with it, but they really didn't know why. So prototypes also are used when we are making judgments about other individuals. So with regard to aesthetics, back in the 1880s, Galton wanted to see if he could come up with what a prototypical military officer would look like. So he took a whole bunch of pictures, 12 actually, of different officers, superimposed them one on the other, and then also 12 pictures of privates and superimposed them on one another. He came up with an average and said, there you go, that is your officer and that is your private. That's what they look like. He was also very interested in determining what a criminal type looked like. So as you can see here, he did the same thing where he superimposed a bunch of different pictures of incarcerated individuals, and the center picture there is the average across all of them, so therefore he determined that was the criminal type. The same with the faces of the doctors in the bottom left. Your average is the center picture, and so that would be the prototypical doctor. So this all sounds wacky when you think about it. However, an example of using attractiveness or understanding attractiveness as being an average face was done by researchers in the 1990s, where they showed that if you morph 8 faces, which you see on the left, across to 32 faces, which is the far pictures on the right, you can see that the person becomes more and more attractive. And the idea is that the more prototypical or average a face becomes, the more attractive they become. So we are attracted to average faces. So supermodels are average. So you think we get this all figured out, that prototype is a great idea to think about this central tendency as a way to put information or objects or people into categories. However, a follow-up approach to this is called the exemplar approach. The exemplar approach, as opposed to looking at a central tendency, the idea here would be that you would compare one item to all the other items in mind in a particular category to determine whether it fits. So in this example, if you're presented with the beanbag chair, you would compare that to all the other examples of chairs that you have in mind to determine whether or not it actually fits in the chair category. So the question is, do people use prototypes or exemplars? It depends. Prototypes seem to be used for really large categories like desserts. So you would come up with an average idea of what a dessert is, and so from there you could determine whether or not your presented item is a dessert, where exemplars may be used for small categories, like trying to determine if a person that you are voting for matches up to examples you have of the President of the United States. And that's all in categorization.